Thank you, Justine. And it's great to be here with you tonight. Talking about screen time, who is in control? Well, I know, firstly, I'm now in control because I've got this. But you're obliged to listen to me for the next 15 minutes around the reality that we're seeing take hold of our lives and the lives of those around us. We call this the great screen age that we have now entered. And how do we navigate the great screen age? Making sense of the I world order. How do we make sense of the world that we have now found ourselves in? Technology that surrounds us, embeds us, and evolves us. Well, it was 48 years ago, on the 16th of July, 1969, that the first two humans landed on the moon assisted by a computer technology. And today, each one of us in our pockets have a device that has the potential to power 120 million Apollo 11 rockets and guide them simultaneously, all at the same time. 20 years ago, something remarkable happened as well. We entered this new era, this great screen age, where we began spending more time looking at screens than spending with each other in face-to-face interaction. And today, most of us, based on research, spend 10 hours and 19 minutes looking at screens every single day. Now, that might not be multi-screening or chronological screening, but of course what we call multi-screening, which is looking at various devices all at the same time. We asked Australians, what do you actually do in your spare time? I know that spare time is being limited, but what is it that people do? And the top 3 responses that we received mostly involved the indoors. Watching TV every week, that's 90% who said they did that. Spending time on social media or the internet. And then if you're lucky, after you've done those 2 things, you might carve out some time at home for some craft, reading, or other home activity. But what is it that we actually want to do more of? Is it these indoor activities? What do we want to do less of? Well, we found in our research with 1,000 Australians is that most of us would like to spend less time on social media. The top thing we'd like to do less of. We'd like to watch less TV and movies at home. And we'd like to spend less time perhaps playing games on the Xbox, the computer, or the tablet. So this our world that we've entered in, it isn't necessarily been caused by the things in our pockets, the iPhones or the iPads, but of course, the internet. Now, this reality of social connection has been around for some time, and yet it's created a whole new generation of young people that have been defined in this new era of connectivity. Generation Z, those born between 1995 and 2009, these are some of the terms that we apply to them. We call them the digital integrators, screenagers, generation connected, digital natives, the I generation. Their whole thinking and reality has been created by this world that they live in. And of course, when they think about a library, they refer to their Spotify library, not a physical library with books. And they're constantly reading, but never a book cover to cover. This generation, many of them are yet to see a floppy disk. In fact, I heard a Gen Z who saw a floppy disk and he said, wow, cool, you 3D printed that save icon that I use all day at work. This is the reality of this generation. And of course, it's not just them that's been affected, but all of us. We have become the Ijen in this I world. It has made us post-linear, where we're no longer thinking about moving through our lives in linear chronological sequences. We might no longer go to work go to TAFE or university and end up with a trade or a profession. Instead, most of us, of course, across the course of our lives, will have 15 careers, 15 jobs spread across 5 careers in our lifetime. Many of us perhaps will have 15 careers. It's made us not only post-linear, but post-logical. We no longer see in structural 9-to-5 systems or modes. We're working from home, working in the office, working at the train, working all the time. 54% of us say that with technology, we struggle to ever shut off. And it's also made us post-literate. Whole new lexicons and language have been invented because we look at screens all the time. When I think about some of the words that have come into effect as a result of this new language, I think about YOLO, this term we've used that permits self-indulgence. You only live once, so why not? And of course, especially when you might have some FOMO and be robbed of your inner peace, struggling with the fact that you're not there all the time. My squad, 100% agrees that things just got lit up, especially in this room where we've got a new event, new criteria. And of course, if you're there and you're thinking about RIP and it being over, I just want you to know that many of us by the end of tonight will have slayed it. Legit. So, this global experiment, this I-world that we live in, what has it created? It's not only the internet, the Ijen, the iPhone, the I-world, but of course, a few other things that we've observed. One of them, which is this individualism that we now see. Anyone now can have their name printed on a bottle of Coke or on a jar of Nutella. Most of us, 9 in 10 of us, have become passive consumers of social media rather than contributors, being active and actually sharing what's going on in our lives. 88% of people, that is 9 in 10, simply scroll and give feedback. And so rather than being active creators of community, we have become someone who, in any other type of social environment, would at best be an introvert and at worst be someone completely socially recluse. A relationship or a community can't work if 90% of people are just soaking in what others are saying and not connecting in a two-way conversation. We talk about it as an online community, but of course, it can be isolating. We talk about people sharing and liking, but actually a lot of people, they feel inadequate as a result of spending time on social media. And in speaking with Generation Y and Generation Z in focus groups, many of us feel a little bit less likely to be happy after we've spent some time on social media, which is, of course, the opposite of how we feel in physical interaction, where we feel a sense of elation. This individualism that we see, of course, it's spread across into the content that we observe as well. And the classic example of that, of course, is the selfie. We live in a selfie generation. And selfies are a clear indication of this type of environment that we've created. A person of taking a photo of themselves, hopefully to get some positive affirmation from anonymous people somewhere out there. It's personal brand managing. Now, that's not a bad thing if you're into marketing, but it can be a challenge when it's about you and your legitimate need for relationship and for community. Are we enabling, contributing to deep social connection in our communities? The individualism that we see is not in itself, but in itself, what it is creates isolation. Never have as many people lived in our cities. If you go back 200 years, just 2% of the world's population lived in cities. Now it's 50%. We have 1.5 million people being added to our cities every week. By the middle of this century, 3/4 of the 9 billion people on the planet will live in cities. And yet, never have we felt more isolated and alone. I remember crossing the street, perhaps just 10 years ago, and being guided by the light that was the sun as I crossed the street. But of course now, because we're looking at our screens and we're trying to navigate the world in which we live, we need our cities like Sydney and Melbourne to implement these types of tactics to help us to look up as we cross the street to our next work meeting. And a while ago, of course, we were all told not to text and drive. But these days, car manufacturers are taking it to a whole new level, where Nissan, for example, this is a signal shield, which is when you put your phone in the middle of the car, blocks any Bluetooth or wireless transmission from accessing your phone. Just what we might need if we can't control ourselves behind the wheel in the future. Just look at how we have been taking in significant moments and how the way that we absorb the reality around us has changed. If we go back to 2008, the papal conclave at the Sistine Chapel in Rome when Pope Benedict was inaugurated. A timeless event in a timeless location. You can see there the crowd, a bit of a Nokia flip phone in the bottom right-hand corner. Perhaps some of you had one of those and still do, or perhaps a parent or a friend has got one, you're trying to get them off. But of course, what happens 5 years later, 2013? What is it that takes place? This significant shift where now we're no longer watching the world around us, but rather watching through a screen. We're present, but we're not really present. And we're using the screen to hide. It's sort of a form of social risk reduction. If we feel awkward, we always have it to connect with. In fact, we've coined a term to describe this isolation. A new language that turns isolation into a virtue. We call it Jomo, the joy of missing out. And many of you in these long winter days, short winter days, long nights, you might be thinking, I don't really want to go out. It's more comfortable for me to stay at home in my PJs and watch some television. And of course, 85% of Australians say exactly the same thing, that when they RSVP for an event, they're likely to say at that very same time that they may not show up, depending on how they feel. And so it has become more comfortable for us to do something like this. And so social media has become, in effect, a sizzle reel of our lives, where we see the best of other people's world, but of course, we see the everyday of our worlds. And so it just doesn't look quite as glamorous. We position things that didn't happen to communicate a reality that is not ours with people that we don't know. It's a bit like Dave Ramsey's quote, isn't it? We buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. And so we've evolved, haven't we? We position things that didn't happen to communicate a reality that is not ours with people we don't know. Is it getting any better? We have this new generation, Generation Alpha, those born since 2010, and they too are part of a truly global experiment. They're part of an experiment where 2.5 million of them born globally every single week are born into a world where there's more data created every day, which means there's more data created in the last 2 years than the history of civilization. An environment in which we're all struggling to get cut through, to understand and to be heard and to keep our inner peace. They're being born into a world where we've now reduced our attention spans from what was a whopping 12 seconds in 2000 to 8 seconds today, which is less than the attention span of this goldfish who can manage to stay attuned for 9 seconds. And of course, they are born into an environment, a global experiment that remains untested in terms of the impacts of the sleep deprivation, the content that comes to them unfiltered, and all of the effects which have not yet been assessed. They're born into a world that is truly visual, in an environment in which visual cut-through is key, in which the symbolic communicates meaning. The ancient symbolism that we've returned to, the petroglyphs that our ancestors used to carve onto rocks, they've returned to this type of era. We have no smoking, no diving, and of course, no Gangnam Style. And the three top things that they will emerge fearing in their lives are also communicated in visual symbols. Of course, their greatest fear is low Wi-Fi signal. If this generation isn't connected, they won't know what to do. But you'll see them having an even greater meltdown, of course, when faced with this buffering signal. It's a generation that will never have to wait through dial-up. And lastly, what goes on when the battery runs out? What would we rather be doing than spending times at screens? Richard Louv, in his 2005 book, The Last Child, talked about something called nature deficit disorder. And in this type of densification and urbanization, most of us, when we think about what we'd rather be doing in our spare time, think about the outdoors, going to the beach, going to a local park, and going to a concert or a venue. And so year after year, as our technology continues to evolve and shape us, we continue to think about how we connect and engage. We're driven for connection, driven for the outdoors, driven for community, and we're trying to communicate that through our messaging. This was reflected in the Oxford Word Dictionary of the year 2015, which was the face with tears of joy. And you might use this. My mother-in-law thought it was tears of sadness, not tears of joy, and used it inappropriately in a text message. But nonetheless, we're trying to describe how we feel through emotive visual icons. It's great to see, as we wrap up, that despite the individualism and the isolationism, the things that keep us indoors and the things that keep us on screens, that the latest fads we've seen have not been augmented reality, which, thank goodness, has been left far behind us, but rather, of course, things like the bottle flip, which you can observe young people doing in schools. And of course, the bottle flip isn't finished until you've done the bottle flip and dab, just in case you're wondering. And the latest thing, of course, doesn't involve technology either. If you've got any young person in your life, they'd love to have a bit of a fidget spinner if you've got a birthday coming up. So it's not all lost hope, but together we have to think about how we navigate this new reality with both our cerebral capacity to think, the eyes of our head that allow us to take in what's taking place. But of course, more than that, more than ever, we need to think deeper with the eyes of our heart, to think viscerally, emotively about this world that we now live in. And with that, I'll hand over to Mark.